Hey scholars, today we will learn about the rock cycle. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain what the rock cycle is. You should be able to describe the processes that change one form of rock into another. One form of rock into another. Before we begin, let's activate some prior knowledge. Take 1 minute, pause this video right now, and answer the following 4 questions. What are the 3 families of rocks? What are igneous rocks and the 2 types of igneous rocks? What are sedimentary rocks and 2 main processes that form sedimentary rocks? What are metamorphic rocks and 2 types of metamorphic rocks? Number 1. What are 3 families of rocks? 3 families of rocks are igneous rocks, sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks. Number 2. What are igneous rocks and 2 types of igneous rocks? Igneous rocks form from molten rock. There are 2 types of rocks, which are igneous: intrusive igneous rocks and extrusive igneous rocks. Intrusive igneous rocks are molten rocks found below the surface in the Earth's crust. Extrusive igneous rocks are molten rock found above the Earth's crust in the surface. The first 2 words of intrusive, in, means inside. The first 2 words of extrusive, ex, means outside. Number 3. What are sedimentary rocks and 2 main processes that form sedimentary rocks? Sedimentary rocks form from sediments. Sedimentary rocks form from 2 processes, which are cementation and compaction. In cementation, the minerals in the rocks are cemented together from dissolved minerals carried by water. In compaction, pressure pushes minerals and fragments of the sedimentary rocks together, squeezing out air and water between the fragments. Number 4. What are metamorphic rocks and 2 types of metamorphic rocks? Metamorphic rocks form from the changing of one type of rock to another by heat, pressure, and chemical processes. There are 2 types of metamorphic rocks, which are contact metamorphism and regional metamorphism. Contact metamorphism is one type of metamorphism that occurs when rocks come into direct contact with magma. Regional metamorphism occurs when rocks are exposed to heat and pressure. What is the rock cycle? The rock cycle is a series or group of changes in the 3 families of rocks, which are igneous rocks, sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks. The 3 main families of rocks, igneous rocks, sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks, can be changed into another type. Different forces and processes cause rocks to change from one type to another and then back again. As you can observe in the illustration to the left, the rock cycle begins from magma. Magma, which is molten rock. As magma cools, hardens, and solidifies, it forms igneous rocks. Once a body of igneous rocks has formed, a number of processes such as weathering and erosion breaks down the igneous rocks into sediments. And what is weathering and erosion? Weathering is the process that breaks down rocks and changes them into sediments. The image below shows a waterfall breaking rocks from the peak side of the waterfall. The rapid movement of water from the waterfall breaks down the rocks, which later become sediments. Water movement are one of the main causes of weathering. Erosion. Erosion is the process that moves the sediments. Water, water, winds, and ice glaciers can help erosion move sediment particles to different locations. As you can see in the third image, the rocks that were broken by weathering will be moved to a different location by erosion. So now that we know that weathering and erosion can turn igneous rocks into sediment, how do sediments become sedimentary rocks? Two processes that help sediments become sedimentary rocks are compaction and cementation. Compaction and cementation will turn sediments into sedimentary rocks. Pressure from compaction will compact the sediments and they will become cemented. They will be cemented, forming sedimentary rocks. If sedimentary rocks are exposed to heat and pressure, they will become metamorphic rocks. Now, let's rewind back to igneous rocks. What if some igneous rocks may have never been exposed to weathering and erosion? If igneous rock never experienced weather and erosion and were exposed to heat and pressure instead of forming sediments, it will form metamorphic rocks. Now, let's rewind back to sedimentary rocks. If sedimentary rocks experience heat that is more intense than normal, they will skip forming into metamorphic rocks and melt into magma to become igneous rocks. Now, let's rewind back to metamorphic rocks. They can be exposed to heat and turn into molten igneous rocks, or they can be exposed to weathering and erosion. Other rocks in the Earth's crust have probably passed through the rock cycle many times during the Earth's history, going back to 4.6 billion years ago in geological time when the planet formed from heavy bombardments of asteroids. Recall from the Precambrian events of the geological timescale. This bombardment turned the planet into a fireball Earth. And as Earth cooled down and formed the first rocks, these rocks began as molten igneous rocks. Take 2 minutes, pause the video right now, read and study the information provided to you here. Let's put what we have learned into practice. Number one, what is the rock cycle? Number two, what is weathering and erosion? Number three, what are the processes of rock cycle? Pause this video right now, take 4 minutes, and answer the following 3 questions. What is the rock cycle? The rock cycle is a group of changes in the 3 families of rocks, which are igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic rocks. What is weathering and erosion? Weathering is the process that breaks down rocks and changes them into sediments. Erosion is the process that moves rocks. What are processes of the rock cycle? The rock cycle changes. It's made up of different processes. First, magma, molten rock form igneous rocks. And then igneous rocks are either exposed to weathering and erosion or heat and pressure. If igneous rocks are exposed to heat and pressure, the igneous rocks will become metamorphic rocks. If not, and instead of being exposed to heat and pressure, and it is exposed to weathering and erosion, igneous rocks will become sediments. When igneous rocks become sediments, sediment experience compaction and cementation, turning the sediment into sedimentary rocks. If sedimentary rocks are exposed to weathering and erosion, they will go back to becoming sediments. If not, and instead they are exposed to heat and pressure, they will become metamorphic rocks. In some cases, sedimentary rocks will be exposed to extremely high temperatures, melting sediments into magma or molten rock instead of turning them into metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rocks can be exposed to extreme heat and melt into magma, or they can be exposed to weathering and erosion and become sediments again.